This evening, I received a question from someone who has been doing inner child work for a bit. And to sort of sum up his question, ultimately, what he's asking is sometimes he doesn't hear from his inner child, and he wants to know what that's about. He wants to know how to connect with his inner child. And one of the things that he described is that he has a younger sibling. Well, not just a younger sibling, but a young sibling. And he's noticed that it's difficult to connect with his younger sibling when he's in the flesh, but that when he's in heart and spirit, that it's easier to connect with her because then it's his heart connecting to her heart. I gotta say, I just love the message. I'm not going to read the message because when I receive messages by email, I consider that to be confidential. And so I don't end up reading the message. I'll talk to you about certain components of the message. But so articulate. And this is also a person who had some reluctance to do the work, some good, healthy reluctance. He wanted to make sure that what I was teaching was from God. And because he could not, you're not going to find inner child work in the Bible, but you can always ask me about the components of what I'm teaching in the way that we do inner child, and I will tell you where that is in the Bible. And so these are things that he's come to understand, that he has come to see as being from God, because he stopped and he prayed and he made sure that he received that from God. That never in a million years could ever offend me. I just want you to know that. Ever in a million years could that offend me. It actually pleases me so much. It makes me so happy when that's the way people are approaching things, because it tells me that they are concerned about God, that they want to place God and his truth first, and they don't want to set this up as an idol, and they don't want to ingest false doctrine, and they don't want to participate in pagan practices. I have that heart. We have to have that heart. So I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled when people handle it that way. That's the right way to approach the work. And one thing I will share from his message is inner child work isn't mumbo jumbo theory or some woo-woo shot in the dark to get over it. Inner child work is conforming to God's design that he placed in us. He gets it. He didn't get that from me. He got that from God. The way that we are doing this is absolutely working within the design that God has given us in the way that we develop. For example, the way that you developed to integrate and internalize the voices of your parents or primary caregivers. That's undeniable. I think that all of us can admit that the way that we speak with ourselves is strongly influenced by the way that we were raised, by the ways in which we were spoken to. If you acknowledge that, you might also acknowledge that something needs to change, or that the way in which you're speaking with yourself now, you can't undo that. Developmentally, you can't undo that. You can't even go back and be raised by your parents again. You're not going to be able to do that. It's now your responsibility. Certainly, these are principles that are taught in the Word, that it's our responsibility. Jesus never says, go blame your parent, go back to your parent and they need to fix this for you. You honor your parents. They do the best that they can. Some of them maybe aren't doing the best that they can, maybe are just outright self-centered. Whatever the case, you're left with it. You're left with whatever has happened. And God is sovereign over all of it. He knows exactly how he's going to build you. You've heard my story. I started out with an uphill battle. And yet God is sovereign over all of it. He knows exactly how he's going to build me and how he has built me to this point and how he'll continue to build me. Belly aching over what I went through is not going to help. Now, with me saying that, I don't want you to misunderstand. I need to grieve the things that occurred. And God tells us repeatedly in the Word that we need to grieve, because grief is extremely important. It brings us into position. It helps us to understand that we have pain, for example, over the ways that we were raised, things that happened to us, and that no one else is God. We need him. We had parents who we respected and revered, but they weren't enough. And they could never be enough. That's not something negative about our parents. They're not designed to be God. And we need to be brought into position in order to have a proper perspective so that we're not setting up idols, and we are brought into the perspective of understanding who we are to God and who he is to us, that he's sovereign, that we need him, and he's got to be number one in our lives. This is by design. He intended for us to come to that realization, even if the road to getting there was incredibly painful, even if the unresolved suffering that we experienced in our lives led us to live in our flesh and to set up a million idols before him. He knows what he's doing in it. I had a lot of idols in my life, and I am well aware of my debt because of the way that I lived. And I appreciate the gift that I'm being extended all the more because of the debt that I have, because of my outstanding debt. Now let's answer this question. It wasn't necessarily framed like in terms of a question. The question is sort of inherent, like it's understood. What he expressed is that he's having difficulty hearing his inner child. And one of the things that he described is that he tried some different things. He tried to talk with his inner child out loud. He tried talking with him in his spirit. He tried imagining him, imagining cradling him, ruffling his hair. And this is a person who's really rending themselves to the process. He's really trying to think about, how do I go about this? How do I go about it? Now, one of the things that I would say ends up being the mistake, and it's not a mistake that this is part of your process, but it's a mistake because it's not going to work. But the reason I say it's not a mistake because it's part of your process is because it's just part of your process of getting there and understanding what works and what doesn't work. A lot of times we will physically imagine our child because we don't have the repertoire of emotional connection to ourselves. What this tells me is that this person was not connected with. If you don't have a repertoire of how to connect with yourself, you didn't develop it because you were not connected with. You may have had your physical needs met. You may have been fed well and, all of your basic needs were met. Basic physical needs, shelter, food, all of these things. But you were not connected with emotionally or spiritually. You were not being fed spiritually for various reasons. Sometimes you're in a single parent household and that single parent is pulled in every which direction and distracted and unable to fulfill all of the roles because there's been a breach in the design of who's supposed to take care of a child, of a father and a mother being present and sharing those responsibilities. It doesn't have to be a blame game. In fact, what is that going to do anyway? But you do need to be able to process grief and be honest about what you experienced when you were growing up. If there's pain there and you keep defending the parent and you keep saying, yeah, but she did the best that she could, or he did the best that they could, and you use that as a defense so that you never have to feel the pain, they could have done the best they could, and also you felt totally alone and neglected. Could both be true? And if both are true, but you keep excusing away because you're afraid of acknowledging the truth, you're afraid of acknowledging what was lost because you think that it's going to somehow dishonor your parent, that's going to prohibit you from being able to do the work. So that's one thing that I would say you got to ask yourself if that's going on. It is not dishonoring your parent. A good parent wants you to heal. A good parent wants you to be able to move forward, to be built by God, and to know that they are not perfect so that you can transition to knowing God. Because if you keep holding your parent up as God, you'll never actually know the God. So that's one thing that I would say is that you need to be able to give yourself permission to feel what you feel, to feel the feelings of what went on when you were growing up. You also need to be able to make those connections of how you are treating yourself as a result of the repertoire that's been built in you. How are you treating yourself? If you were abandoned, if you were neglected, that's likely what you're going to do as an inner parent. It's not because you're bad or you're dumb. It's because that's what you learned to do. It's because that's what you internalized. And so now you understand why it is that we need to restructure this in order for you to have a healthy spiritual life that begins with having a good, attuned personal relationship, so that through that personal relationship, you're also able to withstand examining yourself without crumbling, examining your sin without being bogged down in this overwhelming shame that keeps you stuck, or overwhelming fear, or overwhelming grief. You need the comfort and support of your inner parent in order to move through that. And oftentimes what happens is that inner child part of you, that tender, grieving, feeling part of you, is so compartmentalized. It's so fragmented from the inner parent that supports and walks through and witnesses and shepherds. And you need to be able to bridge that gap. You need to bring attunement and connection between the two. But if it wasn't done with you when you were younger, you're not going to have that repertoire, and it's going to take some time to build it. Now, one of the things that I tell you need to begin with, you always need to begin with disciplining the flesh and bringing yourself into attunement. The two things that I recommend are the God song and breathing exercises. So in workshops, we do breathing exercises because I don't have the best voice. And, so we're not like singing on the phone together, I don't know. It just seems more of a personal thing to sing that God song between you and God. So we do the breathing exercises. And as we're doing the breathing exercises, we're bringing the flesh down. We're bringing attunement. We're transitioning from any part of the tentacles of the flesh that have tried to get back into you. You're just taking that time to bring your physical arousal down, your mental arousal down. These are the physical flesh, mind and body, and you're getting into the heart and spirit. Now with the God song, I highly recommend that you're doing the God song before you do your work. You can do the breathing work, that's fine. But I'll tell you with the God song, what you're doing when you're singing to God, first of all, he inhabits the praise of his people. The devil can't stand there. You get that. You're chasing warfare away. You're getting into the presence of God. You are already, when you're singing, breathing deeply into your diaphragm as you're singing. You're taking care of so many aspects there. The goal is to circumcise from the sinful flesh, discipline the physical flesh, mind and body, get into the heart and spirit, get your focus on God, get attunement to yourself. First in the body and the mind, because you're bringing those down, you're disciplining them, you're paying attention to what it is you're feeling in your body and your mind. That's going to, but not for the purpose of healing there. Understand the difference between what God talks about and what the world does. The world tells you can heal there. The world tells you that you can meditate there. That's baloney. Why would you want to live in the place that Satan jacks up? You can't do that. God is in your heart. God is spirit, and he communicates with your spirit. So you cannot live in the flesh. He's not going to meet you in a place that is undisciplined, that by its very nature cannot discipline itself. But you are living in the physical flesh. And so you need to be accountable and aware of how you're feeling in your body and how you're feeling in your mind. And here's what it tells you. Here's what information you are getting from that. If you are activated in your body and your mind, and you're not able to bring yourself down, your body and your mind are bearing the symptom of an emotional and spiritual dilemma, of your emotional and spiritual condition. You need to learn how to be attuned to what's going on in your body and your mind, how to be aware of what's going on in your body and your mind, because that's going to help you to understand what your spiritual condition is. If you are able to come down, but maybe you're noticing as you're doing this, you're going to begin to notice to what extent the flesh has tried to pull you back towards itself. And that's going to serve as a gauge. It's going to serve as a gauge to tell you, are you in a position where you need to be fasting because you're really struggling with this? You're going to start to notice what the flesh is doing, what it's trying to do, and how it's trying to pull your physical flesh back to it. You're going to start to understand your vulnerabilities and how you need to tighten things up. And God is going to speak to you, but he's not going to speak to you there. He's going to speak to you about it, but he will not speak to you there. So you have to get into the heart and spirit. Now, let me talk with you about what happens if you don't do that. If you do not discipline your physical flesh and circumcise from the sinful flesh, they will overpower your heart and spirit, and you will attempt to intellectualize your feelings or even provide a therapized response, and you will be totally disconnected from your inner child. So if you're not feeling like you're connected to your inner child, you're not feeling like you're able to express what it is that you're feeling, you're most likely in your flesh. And I say most likely, and it's probably 100% you're in your flesh. Now, let me explain the therapized response, why it is that I distinguish between being in your intellectualizing and a therapized response. A therapized response is even more dangerous. This is what we're taught to do in mental health, to talk about our feelings in an intellectual way, in a compartmentalized way, because the premise in most modalities in mental health is that now you're going to examine your thoughts about that because your feelings don't provide information. They're not a valid part of your design. They're more of a nuisance that you need to think away, that you need to intellectualize away. Do you see why that is dangerous? God has feelings. Who is science to say that that's not valid? So what ends up happening is you end up totally fragmented. You're not integrated. You're fragmented between this nuisance that is your feelings, and now you're going to treat your child who has those feelings, who is largely responsible in your personal relationship for expressing those feelings. You're going to treat them as a nuisance. You're going to treat them like they need to think this away. You're going to talk with them in a cognitive way, or you're going to behaviorally try to make their feelings go away. Now, let me tell you the examples. I'll start with the behavioral one. Oh, honey, don't think about that. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Don't feel that way. Let's go get an ice cream. Let's go get something that distracts us in our flesh. Get an ice cream, have a treat, watch a movie. Let's go distract ourselves behaviorally. Or how about this one? Why do you feel that way? What does a child know about why they feel? Why should they have to explain why they feel that way? That's not the proper way to speak with a child. If a child is explaining to you how they feel, it's enough that they feel. Be with them. Be with them in those feelings. Facilitate. Help them to express themselves. Witness what it is that they are feeling. Help them to understand what they're feeling by showing up, by being present with them. I really wanted to play with her today. I'm mad. Why didn't she come over? I wanted to play with her and now I'm mad and I'm bored. Why do you feel that way? Why should the child then have to cognitively process why they feel that way? Isn't it implied? They feel that way because they're disappointed. Isn't that enough? Or do they now need to dissect the way that mental health requires us to dissect our feelings? Oh, sweetheart, you're disappointed. I'm so sorry that you don't get to play with her. What are you feeling right now? I'm just wondering if she even cares about me. I'm just wondering if she doesn't like me and doesn't want to be my friend. You see the difference? Therapizing your feelings is so dangerous, you guys. I'm so sorry for those of you who've gone to therapy and learned to do that because it is so incredibly and insidiously destructive. For people who already, because of the increase in wickedness, because of the burdens and the split in family, people are not being spiritually fed in the home. They're not learning how to process their feelings. They're not learning how to acknowledge the design God has given them, especially because science thinks it can covet our design and rewrite what God has already established. And so now we don't even know how to connect with ourselves. We don't know how to connect with our children, and we don't know how to connect with these tender parts of ourselves. How could we possibly get to a place where we're able to soothe and integrate the suffering that we experience and then be able to learn from God and then be able to examine ourselves? No, we don't even know how to do this. We don't even know how to be with ourselves or listen to the design that God has given us. We have to connect with that tender part of ourselves. And in terms of relationship, when you're compartmentalized and you're fragmented, I think is a better word. When you're fragmented between the supportive and wise parent And the feeling child, the tender child, when you're fragmented between those two parts of yourself, it's as if you're relating with someone who is totally absent and unfeeling towards you. That's what the child ends up feeling, that they're totally absent and unfeeling. You're seen and not heard. You're just told to move from one step to another, like you're some kind of robot. But you need that parent to see you and to help you to understand, what is this that I'm feeling inside? Why am I feeling this way? What is God doing? How is he building me? What does he want me to know by designing me with these feelings? But see, if a parent treats you as though you are supposed to be seen and not heard, then yeah, your feelings are going to be a nuisance. They're going to be a nuisance to them. If your parent is overburdened and trying to get from point A to point B, just get in your car seat. We need to go. I need to get to work. They're not able to take that time with you, to be there with you, to help you, to express the feelings of maybe, I need more time with you, Mom. I need to have conversations with you. I miss you. I hate going to daycare. I hate going to school for 6 to 8 hours. I mean, that's not natural, you guys. These things are not natural. And yet we force our children to do it all the time. Our children should be with us. They should not be raised by this satanic system of the world. They need to be with us. They need a father and they need a mother. And they need to be raised in the home. And they need to be raised by parents who are present and who understand that they have been entrusted by God to raise his children. How different would it be if we understood that? How differently we would relate with our children. How differently we would relate with ourselves. So internalize that understanding. That's how you need to treat your child. Rend your heart to that. The other things that I think need to be examined here, and I would say this is a good place for you to start examining your feelings. It would be a good place for you to start in personal relationship, is how did you connect or not connect with your primary caregivers? What did you want from your parent versus what did you receive? You need to be able to grieve. You need to be able to acknowledge it for what it was. My grandma's generation, I have actually a step grandma who's from the South. And I think culturally and also generationally, everything's supposed to look good. And you just, you put a positive spin on everything. You never say a negative thing, even if it's true. And that's a little crazy making, quite frankly. How do you not acknowledge if something is painful, if it's painful? How are you going to put a positive spin on that? It's not healthy. It's not reality. And you're never going to be able to receive God's ministry if you're denying that this is a bad situation, that this situation is painful. If you're just pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and putting a smile on and a stiff upper lip, that is not healthy behavior. It is not healthy mentality. Regardless of the circumstances around whatever your parent was going through, you need to be able to acknowledge your feelings. You don't have any ability to do anything about who your parents are or were, but you absolutely have a responsibility to acknowledge the ways that you have felt. Because if you don't, remember what I've told you, you will go on to repeat traumatic situations through the compulsion to repeat. Well-known phenomenon. When you're in a position of authority and power, you will end up being a perpetrator. And when you are in a position where someone else is in power over you, you will be a victim. And you will continue to play this out because it's unresolved in you. Because it remains a chink in your armor and the devil slithers in and he does his thing. He will crank you up and compel you to behave in ways that are totally outside of your integrity because you're afraid. He'll cause you to run in situations where you need to face the music. He'll cause you to cower in situations where you need to grow. He'll cause you to attack and try to control in situations where you need to go to God, where you need to acknowledge the powerlessness that you are feeling and the power that you are deluding yourself with, or the fallacy of power. Whatever you experienced with your parent is going to become the way you treat yourself until you heal. So it's important information. If you're feeling like you're not able to connect with your child, you were not connected with. Were you listened to? Were you fed spiritually? Were you witnessed? Were you shepherded? Were you invested in? These are the things that you need to ask yourself, and you need to process, and you need to allow your inner child to feel those feelings and to talk about what it was like without doing the cognitive behavioral stuff, without saying, oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. Let's go get an ice cream. Let's go watch a movie. Let's go watch a show. Let's veg out and distract because this is too intolerable to feel. Without forcing the child to engage in some cognitive process about their feelings. Why do you feel that way? Just reflect their feelings. Be with them. Be present with them as they talk about their feelings. And when they get stuck and they don't know where to go, you ask them again, how are you feeling right now? Tracking with them. Oh, I'm noticing you're stuck right now. How are you feeling? How are you feeling about talking about this? I noticed your mood changed. Can you tell me what's going on? How are you feeling? Your child, your inner child, and also your like human children, they're pretty darn smart. They're pretty wise, actually. And when you are listening to them and you're being present with them, they actually will come to the solution of what they need. What they need is someone to help them to articulate what they're feeling. They need someone to witness them and to shepherd them, to help them to understand that what they're feeling is good. It comes from God. This is part of their design. There's a reason why they're feeling that way. What's the information? Help them get to the information. Why are they feeling this way? What is it? What is it? I started out in the example that I gave you. I'm disappointed she didn't come and play with me. I'm mad. And then the parent responds, you're so disappointed. It's so disappointing that she didn't come here. And what's a child going to do when you say that? Yeah, and then blah, blah, blah. And they're going to start talking. They're going to start telling you about how they feel. Does she even care about me? Does she want to be my friend? Am I important? You need to facilitate that. You need to draw that out of your child. And it's going to be hard initially. If you don't have a repertoire, which, all of us are starting without a repertoire for what we need, because those are the places we're stuck. If we had the repertoire, we wouldn't be feeling the need to do this. So it's going to be, there's going to be a learning curve. And it might feel impossible. And you know what? By you, it is impossible. And if you're feeling that, you're feeling like this is impossible, I want to tell you why you're feeling that. Because you need God. So when you feel that, that should be a signal to you that you need to lean into him, that you need to pray to him, that you need to ask him, Lord, I'm trying to do this work. I have prayed to you. You've already confirmed to me that this is the work I'm supposed to be doing. If you haven't done that, you need to do it. Please be with me. Please minister to me. Help me through this work. Clear away these things that are standing in the way of me being able to do this. Build this repertoire in me, and he's going to show up. Start with that process. That's where your work is. Start with that process. How was I treated, and how am I treating myself? What was that like for me? Tap into the grief. You got to get down to the grief. The grief is where it's at. That's where you're going to heal. Grief is so important to God. If you want to know how important grief is, go into your handy dandy Bible app and type in grief. Look at all the contexts where God talks about grief. Seek his heart. Try to understand, why is it that grief is so important to him? And I'll tell you one of the biggest reasons, because it helps us to understand who we are and who he is and why we need him. It brings us right-sized, because most of the time we are living outside of who we actually are. We do not have a proper perspective. We tell God how he should be God. We require him to come along for our day. And then we tell him to do this and, fulfill this delusion of my mind, prophesying. We do all kinds of ridiculous things. But grief brings us into position. Grieve, mourn, lament, weep, wail, return to me, and I will return to you. Grief is part of repentance. Grief is part of healing. It is 100% critical to healing. There is no way to heal without experiencing grief. Even Paul talks about a particular kind of grief, which is godly grief, a grief that leads to repentance. And you're going to experience this as you begin to grieve the things that happen to you. You're also going to be faced with the things that you've done as a result of that pain. You will be brought to godly grief. And you will be repenting for things you weren't even aware that you did. And God is going to cleanse you. He's going to sanctify you. And this work that some of you, I know, I understand, may dread, you're going to come to look forward to doing this work because you're going to know that the fruit's right around the corner. The peace, the integration, the understanding, the clarity, it's right around the corner. So start with this examination of how you were treated. How did you have relationships with your primary caregivers? How are you relating with yourself? How has that how is that working itself out inwardly? How does that work in the way that you relate with others? Because undoubtedly that's going to affect the way that you're relating with others in relationship. If you had a critical parent, you're going to be critical towards yourself and you're going to be critical to the people who are closest to you. Oh boy, do I know that well. And it is so painful when you see that you're acting out the very things that were done to you. But it's a great opportunity for repentance, not just acknowledgement, but change. And your relationships are going to become so beautiful as a result of that work. Let your inner child talk about how you feel when you reflect on what you wanted from your parent versus what you received. How did your inner child feel then? How do they feel now? What commitment can you make to them in your own relationship? You were abandoned and neglected in relationship with your primary caregivers. They were too preoccupied, whatever the case was. Now you need to make a commitment that you're not going to do that with your inner child. Otherwise, you're just adding insult to injury. They're going to be wounded. You need to examine, how can you do this? What safety structures do you need to put in place so that you're not neglecting them? You need to set alerts on your alarm, on your phone, calendar, to check in with your child throughout the day, to really sit with them and be present with them, because you don't want to start making promises that you're not going to keep. This truly is a relationship. I realize it's a relationship that's happening inside of you, but it's a relationship. And so if you are wounding that child, they're not going to trust you and they're not going to talk with you. Now, I want to go back to what was said regarding this person's younger sibling. And I'll remind you that the thing that was said is that he has this younger sibling who he doesn't necessarily feel like he connects with until he gets into the heart and spirit. Then it's heart to heart. That's exactly what needs to happen with you and your inner child. There are certain things that you can do in order to connect with your inner child. Little, tricks or techniques that you can use. I recommend getting a picture of yourself when you were a little kid. Look at that picture, try to connect with that child. This, by the way, was a very painful thing for me to do when I first started doing this work, to look at pictures of myself. Incredibly painful, but it will also be powerful. You're going to start realizing some of the attitudes that you have towards your inner child, and you're going to need to sort through those in your work. Why is it that you feel like that kid is a bad kid or they're dirty or whatever it is? Where is that coming from? What is the pain? What is the grief? The other thing that I do is, in psychology, they call it grounding. There are different things that they do for grounding, but children need touch. They need to feel like you're physically present and emotionally present. But one of the things that I do is I take my right hand and I'll put my hand over my heart or on my shoulder, and I'll just kind of ground myself with that physical presence and physical touch. And it's become a signal to me now when I do that, because I'm being, I'm kind of tenderly letting her know I'm right here. And so now when I do it, my brain alerts that, oh, okay, we're going there right now. So that's one way to kind of route a connection that we're going heart and spirit. We're getting into the feelings. Another thing that I will do is I'll look in a mirror. So when I first started doing this work, I would carry around a little pocket mirror in my purse. Now, I'm home most of the time, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll pull down the visor in my car. I don't recommend a full-length mirror or something like that where you're like looking at your whole body and you're saying, oh, you're so beautiful, and all these hokey things that mental health has you do or coaching has you do. It's not about your physical body. And one of the things I was going to tell you earlier is, imagining your child and all of this other stuff, it brings it to the superficial. It brings it to the flesh. Where you need to go is heart and spirit. You could be the most beautiful person in the world. You're not going to feel beautiful just because you look at your body and you tell yourself you're beautiful. That's ridiculous. You need to feel that value inside of you. And to be honest, when you have that value inside of you, the superficial doesn't really matter anymore. So rather than imagining kind of the physical attributes of this child, imagine the heart. What's the heart? That's where you want to go. That's where you want to rend yourself. In terms of the mirror work, I pull the visor down and I look into my eyes, because you can look at in a full-length mirror and then you get distracted by, I hate this part of my body, or, oh my goodness, look at my gray hair, look at my wrinkles. I mean, you just get distracted by all of these things and you don't connect with the child. You're focused on the outside. But when you're looking just at your eyes, it's like the window of the soul, right? That's what Proverbs 30:17 tells us. The eyes are kind of important. Like Proverbs 30:17 tells us the eye is the window to the soul. And then Jesus tells us if the eyes are healthy, the whole body is going to be healthy. The eyes are the lamp of the body. So if you have light in your eyes, you're going to be healthy. But if you have darkness, how great is that? If the light in your eyes is darkness, how great is that darkness, right? So the eyes are actually pretty important. Not the flesh, the eyes, because you're looking inward. So you'll be able to tap into that child by looking into your eyes. Might take a minute for you to develop that repertoire, but these are some things that you can do, that you can tap into. I hope this video has been helpful. I hope it's answered questions. Thank you for listening. Please leave comments and questions. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.